When did you first realize that public speaking was something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I don't know that I thought of it as public speaking at the time, but my first memory that this kind of came on my radar that I vividly remember this, and my mom remembers it too. I was in second grade, and she was folding laundry, and I was just sitting in their room on the bed, just kind of chatting, right? And I remember she was folding laundry just kind of out of nowhere. We weren't even talking about this. I said, Mom, when I grow up, I don't think I want to be a motivational speaker, but I would like to be a motivational teacher one day. And then she just kind of looked up from the laundry and was like, what? Like, where did that come from? And I think she said, go play outside. She has since told me, she's like, her frame of reference for motivational speakers is that at that time was like, you have to have your arm bitten off by a shark if you're going to. So she was like, what is going to happen to this kid? Oh my gosh. But I think that literally was the beginning. That's not to say I had like this A to Z plan, but the topic of communication, I can genuinely say like was on my mind at that time and has been on my mind as something that I paid like really, really deep attention to ever since.
It's so funny to me that at that age, you were able to delineate a difference between like talking and communicating.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a God thing, right? Like, and I think there's, all of us can say this. This isn't unique to me, that there is evidence of what we are maybe called to do or gifted to do in our childhood. And thankfully for me, that was something that I vividly remember and held on to. But then, that wasn't the only time. I remember in elementary school sitting back and like my history teacher teaching a lesson to us in elementary school, and me sitting back and literally just thinking to myself, I could communicate this better than they are right now, and here's what I would do differently. And like very prideful thought to have as a fourth grader. But again, just highlights the fact that like, man, there's certain things that God has given us that it's like we didn't even necessarily have to work to become passionate about. We were already passionate about it. And then what's so cool is when you pair that passion with hard work, which I would like to say that I've done. I've been studying this, working on this, developing as a communicator for a very long time now. Well, then that's where you start to really experience growth, I think.
Yeah. Did you ever take that for granted?
Oh man, I think I still take it for granted in some ways. Like, for a very, very long time, anytime I hear someone speak in any context, I simultaneously listen to the message that they're giving, and then I also listen to the way that they're giving the message. And truly, I have notebooks where the left side of the notebook is dedicated to the way they give the message, and the right side of the notebook is given to the message that they've given, right? And so, I have heard a lot of people speak, and every single time I listen to someone speak, that's how I listen, right? Is with those two, whether it's physically or mentally, it's always how are they giving the message, and then what's the message that they're giving. Sometimes I actually pay way more attention to how they're giving the message, and that can actually be not a good thing. But as a result, do I take it for granted? A lot of times, if I'm not careful, as a business leader now, I'll delegate communicating something to someone else. And I'll just be like, oh, just give a 30-minute speech. No big deal. Like, knock yourself out. And then you see their face and it's like, oh my gosh, this sounds awful. Like, so I think what I often take for granted is, number one, not everyone thinks about this. And that's the way it is. This is not me boasting. That's the way it is with everyone in their gifting. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to get trained on it because you were gifted in it.
Yeah.
And so you take for granted that something that came naturally to you might have to get trained to others. But then the other thing I take for granted is that I still learn is not everyone enjoys it. I legitimately, I think it might be one of my favorite things to do on the planet is to take a subject, to create a message that is aimed at engaging an audience around that subject and teaching it to them so that they grow, and then delivering that message. I love every facet of that from start to even past the finish of it. And it doesn't matter if it's 4 people, which I've done, or 4,000 people, which I've also done. I just love the activity of it. And it turns out not everyone feels that way about it. I think it's Jerry Seinfeld that he makes the joke. He says, the data literally says that most people are more afraid of public speaking than of death. And what he says is, so if you're at a funeral, you would rather be the one in the casket than the one giving the eulogy. Is what that means. Man. It's just like, it's wild that it terrifies people, but I've honestly always loved it.
Yeah. You talked about taking notes on the talk and then taking notes on the way that they're communicating. I mean, I shared with you recently, I was preparing to give a talk for probably the first time in I don't know how long, since I was involved in Toastmasters as a kid, I think, genuinely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did was like, I'm going to listen to a communicator that I really appreciate and just listen, like not even really listen to their message, just listen to the way they're communicating. And that's probably the first time in my life I've ever done that.
Really? Okay, so talk 30, to who did you listen to and what was that experience like? Like what did you pull from it?
Yeah, well, it was Matt Chandler.
Okay.
And I think some of the things I pulled from it was like, especially from his intro, just the way he would segue from a story or an illustration, and then he would establish a truth, and then he would like state that truth. And then from there, the rest of his talk or his sermon was an explanation or defense of that truth that he stated. And I mean, that's not the only way to communicate, but it was like, here's a guy that I appreciate as a communicator that I've listened to a lot and who has, through his communication, served me really well. But now I'm looking at it from a lens of who, like, how is he communicating, right? Yeah. Versus just listening to the message that he's sharing.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And I mean, that's going to be one of the practices. So we're going to talk about 7 actions today.
Yep.
And that's directly related to one of the actions that we're going to talk. But I mean, like if we're talking high level, just at the beginning of this conversation, I am just so deeply convinced, and I am biased, but just because I'm biased doesn't mean I'm wrong, right? I'm so deeply convinced that it would benefit everyone. And I am saying the word everyone literally. It would benefit everyone to grow as a communicator.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And I've shared this with you this year. This is something I identified as an area I would personally like to grow. So I'm excited to dive into this a little bit more.
Yeah. The other thing that's so cool about the topic of communication growth is it's not all that dissimilar from why I love running. And that I love running because it's immediately accessible to everyone, right? All you need is a pair of shoes, and there's a whole community of people that would argue you don't even need that, right? Like to go for a run and you can get better at running. Communication is the same thing. It's not, you don't have to go buy a bunch of stuff. You don't have to go, get a speaking gig to practice as a communicator. Everything we're going to talk about today, like you can literally start practicing today. And what's so neat about communication too is you don't even have to carve out additional time to practice. If you just bring more intentionality to the thing you're already doing, many of us are talking already. What if we started to say, how do I actually communicate this? Well, then, man, if you have that many opportunities for reps and practice and you apply your intent to it, you're going to grow. And so I just see a lot of times the minute people decide they want to grow as a communicator, they get on this path that it's actually really cool to see how fast you can improve.
Yeah. So let's jump in here. What are some things to consider or keep in mind as far as like if you want to grow as a communicator?
Yeah. So I would highlight 3 principles that, I would just want everyone to have at the forefront of their mind as we jump into this 7 actions. So these principles really represent truths that are why it's helpful to grow as a communicator. And number 1, there's a difference between talking and communicating. And I actually probably don't need to elaborate on that. People understand, and communication has intent embedded into it, right? I've heard it say before that a good teacher takes the complex and makes it simple. Sometimes an educator takes the simple and makes it incredibly complex, right? So we want to be great teachers. We want to be simplifiers of things in service of other people. And that's a difference between talking and communicating. Number 2, communication is a kingpin skill. What I mean by that is, it's a bowling analogy, obviously. So if you go bowling, I don't often do this, but what do you want to do? You want to hit the king pin. Why? Because that front pin is the one that if you knock it over, it knocks everything else over. I deeply believe this because I've seen it play out true in my life, and I've seen it play out true in so many leaders' lives that we work with around the country. If you grow in communication, so many other things become available to you because we live in a world that requires you to communicate. And the minute you grow as a communicator, you unlock opportunities for learning, for growth, for connection, for partnership. Everything gets a little bit easier and a little bit more effective the minute you decide to grow as a communicator. So it's a kingpin skill. And then the final thing that I just want people to remember, and then if you've got any questions you'd like to follow up on these principles, is that communication is complex. So we have a diagram in a team training that we do on this topic, but I'll just see if I can describe it. So think about what communication is. There's a message that I have in my brain that I intend to send. Then there's the words that I choose to use to send that message, and that message gets sent. Now, I oftentimes even struggle with that jump, right?
Don't we all?
Message in my brain. Yeah, that's right. The message in my brain to the words that I use, right? But then there's the message that you receive, and then the message you receive, the message you interpret, and then the message you intend to send, and then there's the words you speak. And that, what we just described right there, like 7 steps, is one part of a conversation. Absurd. It is so complex, right? And every single one of those junctures is an opportunity for absurd breakdown. I see that and I'm like, I am just grateful that anything ever works ever, right? We should really be grateful to God because I think it is a miracle, right? And so communication is complex. You taking ideas from your head and transferring them into the minds of other people so that they can act on them is an incredibly complex activity. And that's why what we're going to focus on in these 7 actions, you don't counter complexity with complexity. You counter complexity with simplicity. And so much what we're going to be talking about in these 7 actions is hopefully going to help you simplify your communication so that it can be used not to confuse people, but rather to serve people.
We were in our leadership incubator a couple weeks ago or last week, and totally unrelated conversation, but one of the examples that was used was it involved the idea of establishing rhythms and protocols around snow removal in the city of Minneapolis versus St. Paul.
Yeah.
And we were discussing the different approaches that they took. And I think one of the things that just came to mind in the moment when I was talking about it was like weather is such an unpredictable thing and something that we cannot control. And so it really requires like structure and predictability in the way that we approach the response to it. And I think communication could be somewhat similar. It's like we can't always control exactly how someone is going to like receive the message that you're sharing. But if we establish some principles to follow and we're well practiced and have created an environment where there's some level of structure, that becomes easier.
That's right. Yeah. We're talking about intentionality. We're talking about simplicity. I, especially if we're talking about leading a business, I'm trying to think if I've ever met a leader that was effective that wasn't an effective communicator. I don't think that I have. And I also don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that it's one of those things you have to be effective at to lead well. And I also think that the lid on your leadership will be the lid of your effectiveness as a communicator. So like, if you are hitting a ceiling as a communicator, your leadership is also going to hit that ceiling eventually. Praise God, we can grow is what I would, hope everyone can keep in mind. The other thing that I would, encourage people to remember is communicator is not an identity. Right. You never go to the hospital and they say, it's a boy, it's a girl. Oh my gosh, you had a communicator, right? Like, no, right. And so it's a skill that can be learned and developed. Certainly there are people that are more predisposed to be good at it and enjoy it. But I have seen people that are literally terrified at it and don't think they're good at it grow to, like legit give talks for a living. I know these people. And so that has just instilled in me a great deal of confidence that anyone can grow in this. They just have to decide that they want to.
Cool. Well, let's jump in.
Yeah. Okay. So we got 7 actions, and these are really practical things you can do to grow as a communicator. And I would say these apply to communication to groups, right? So groups could be, your 4-person leadership team. It could be your 400-person company. It could be your networking group that you're a part of. But then I also would say this is also really, really great practical tools for communicating to audiences. So that's more public speaking, right? And so action number 1 is remember who it's for. And the reason why I wanted to start here is because we already said this, right? What keeps most people sidelined from growing as a communicator, I would say nerves, right? That it freaks them out. And the reason why that when I talk to people that are freaked out by the idea of public speaking, the reason that I often see is really driving that fear is they are very, very concerned with what are people are going to think about me. Mm-hmm. How are people going to perceive me? What are people going to think about me? What if I make a fool of myself? What if I'm not good at it, right? It's all me, myself, and I, which, we would call it fear and nervousness, which can look humble. In reality, you have taken the entire subject of communication, which in itself is designed to be service, and you've made it about yourself. And so remember who it's for is just this reorientation of our mind and attitude of saying, this is for them. This isn't for me. So although those questions might be interesting, they're irrelevant because really this is how am I going to serve them? And what I've found is the minute people start to remember who it's actually for, their nerves actually go down.
Yeah. It's funny how pride, there's like 2 sides to the same coin with pride. It can either look, oh, this person wants to get up in front of thousands of people and make themselves look like, otherworldly and heroic or like, brag about themselves. But there is another side of like, if you're so terrified of standing in front of people in that way, because you're just constantly thinking about yourself and, oh yeah, like, what do they think of me? I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to, that's still pride. It's still an overemphasis on like your identity and who you are, and honestly, like what people probably are going to think or even remember about you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I mean, I love that you called attention to the other side of that too. Is it is in your best interest to go into any message, any talk, any meeting where you're supposed to communicate. And maybe you're the person, this is me. I would say this, maybe you are the person that's more of a performer by nature. And you make it about yourself, but that makes it into this performance that draws attention to you, that puts the spotlight on you. If that's more your wiring, then you would also benefit from remembering who it's for. Because I know this to be true. I've learned this the hard way sometimes. People can sniff out a prideful, boastful, arrogant communicator from a mile away these days. We are very practiced at understanding who those people are. And the minute you start just telling all these stories that make yourself look like the hero, and you're not looking to serve people, you're looking to impress people, and you're just hoping, you're just kind of waiting for people's feedback. Like that's the reason why you're doing it. People can sniff that out from a mile away and they won't trust it. And because they don't trust it, they won't follow it. And so it benefits both sides of that spectrum to really internalize before we ever communicate, hey, who is this for? Mm. I would add to that, it's one of the reasons why you and I pray anytime we do a podcast episode. For me personally, at least, it's like, God, help me to remember why we're actually doing this.
Yeah.
It's not Alex Judd's story time where I get to look like this hero. That's not the goal at all. It's like to actually serve and help people. And if that's the vision, then the strategy looks way different.
Yeah. And for me, the prayer is make the connection between my brain and my mouth work.
Very good. Very good. Both are valid prayers.
Yeah. What's number 2?
Okay. So number 1 is remember who it's for. Number 2 is actually a whole lesson that I created years ago called Understand the Standards of Effective Communication. This, again, I don't know if I've shared this story. This is a God thing because this is still the base level fundamental communication framework that I reference for myself today as a communicator, that it's the first thing I reference whenever I teach communicators. And I've been teaching this for a very long time now. And the way that this came about was it would have been 2012. I was an intern for a church. I was a incoming junior in college, and I was an intern at a church, and we were at Beach Week. And the pastor had told me, hey, during this lunch at Beach Week, you're going to take a group of 40 high school students, and I want you to teach them something in the middle of the day so they're out of the heat. And that's your time. You use it how you see fit. And naturally, as an incoming junior in college, I waited till the hour before that was about to happen to create that lesson, right? Which that's not a recommendation for communication. But to this day, I can't even remember like how this came about, but I was walking on the beach getting ready for this. And I was excited about it because I loved communication, and I was honored to be asked to do this. And I was just thinking about what would be most helpful. And I just said, well, what is effective communication? And I was walking on the beach, and literally what came to mind as I was on the beach that day is clear, confident, concise, energetic, and effective. Right. That was what I thought of. And then I proceeded to give, an hour lesson on those 5 topics about an hour later. And it went like really, really, really well. It was crazy. At one point I was sitting on a table and the table collapsed, but I jumped up fast enough, and it was like this unbelievable moment. I was like, wow, that I don't know if I could do that again if I tried. But all that to say, it went really, really well. And literally this framework is, since then, every message that I give, I run it through the filter of these 5 qualities. Anytime I evaluate someone's message, to help them grow as a communicator, I'm using these 5 qualities. And really, there's not magic to these 5 qualities. It's just a simple reminder of what effective communication actually is. And so before we kind of break each one down, anything else you'd add to that, or any questions you have on that?
No, I mean, I guess I would just reiterate that you practice what you preach. We were talking about this on a hike when we were talking about a talk I was doing last week, and it was really helpful for me to look at what I was trying to say through this lens. So I'm excited to dive into this a little more.
And really what these represent is not dissimilar from what we talk about in our operationalized content. These represent standards. Because if you ask someone, hey, can you evaluate my communication? You're like, well, compared to what? Or through what lens, right? The minute you use these 5 words, hey, can you tell me red, yellow, green, how was I in these 5 areas? It becomes so easy to grow, to improve. And then you can actually front load that and read your message beforehand, or practice your message beforehand, and keep these standards in mind, which is really helpful. Yeah. So can I walk through one at a time maybe?
Sure. Yeah. I was just going to ask you, like, as far as clear goes, which is the first one, where does clarity start in the process of being a communicator, preparing to communicate? Are you looking at, obviously, like the end result would be what they're sharing, but how can you make sure that you're going to be clear going into something like that?
Yeah. We already hit on some of this. Understand your motive for communicating, because that's going to drive what you say. And then understand what you're actually trying to communicate. We'll get more into that in point 3, but a lot of times people don't communicate clearly because they don't actually know what they're trying to say. So clarity of intent and clarity of message is key. That's why we have a whole action dedicated to that topic. But then the other thing that I really want to focus on with clarity, this is what I used to always teach whenever I would teach high schoolers communication, is message matters, manner matters more. I have heard so many communicators that their message was a 10, right? Like really, really exceptional message. They cared about it. They thought about it. They believed in the content. They worked so hard to prepare the content, but their manner was a 2. And what I mean by manner is like ums, uhs, likes, low volume, like no energy, not engaging, 0 eye contact. I knew a guy once that I watched him communicate. And as he was communicating, hopefully you're watching on video so you can see this. As he was communicating the message he was trying to get, literally he was talking and his hand just went like this. And he just started going like this with his fingers. And he had no clue he was doing it. It was his nervous tick or something. He was just doing this. And it's like, that is incredibly distracting. And like everyone in the room at that point, no one heard what he was saying, because everyone was like, what is this joker doing with his hand right now, right? And it's kind of like Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights is like, I don't know what to do with my hand. That stuff is incredibly important. And we often don't pay attention to that stuff because we're like, oh, that's thinking too much about myself. No, if you don't do that stuff well, people are not going to be able to hear what you are saying.
Right.
And so the clarity of your message, the volume, the amount of filler words you're using. In the high school communication class I used to teach, anytime they'd say like, or anytime they'd start a sentence with we'd do 10 push-ups. And they got better real fast, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about clarity is your message able to be delivered in such a way that it can be understood? Most of us never even get to the starting line because there's too many blockers.
What's the bridge between those things you just identified, the nervous tics, the weird like fidgeting, right? And confidence.
Because that's the second quality.
Right.
I think you can have confidence in your message and confidence in yourself. And I think you need both, right? So confidence in your message is, do you feel competent and therefore confident in what you're about to deliver? And do you believe what you're sharing? Because if you don't believe in what you're sharing, why on earth should anyone else? And they will not. People can smell it from a mile away. And that's what I would say is when you're confident in your message, there are still quirks. And I would actually say the best communicators I know still have a lot of quirks, but those quirks don't represent the lack of attentiveness or preparation to clarity. Those quirks represent authenticity because they're literally so comfortable. This was me for quite a while. Whenever I became the host of the Entree Leadership Podcast, right? One of the largest and most prolific business and leadership podcasts in the country. Ken Coleman, brilliant leader, brilliant podcaster. He was the one that was developing me. And I'll never forget one of the first times we ever sat down to record. We were having great conversation and we were going back and forth and stuff. And then he said, okay, let's go ahead and hit record. And it was like, we were talking, we hit record. And then I was like, hey, Ken, I'm Alex. It's great to see you today. This is going to be awesome. And he just was like, okay, pause. He was like, who is that? And he just, gave me a hard time. And then he was like, that's like your Magoo voice. And I want you to try to never use your Magoo voice ever again.
You're not a sports announcer.
Exactly. And that's, truly, it's wild because I work with people a lot on practicing their communication. When we were practicing the talk you're working on, you did a great job of not doing this the other day. But it's like they literally talk about what they're about to do. And then I say, okay, that's great. Now let's just go ahead and do it. And their entire tone, their entire inflection, their entire body posture, it changes, right? And it's like, just be so confident in your message that nothing changes, that you just go straight into it. So that's confident in message. And then number 2 is confident in yourself. Right. You do have to have a level of belief of it's like you're here for a reason. And I would say if people want to spend time on confidence in yourself, I think a great place to start would be our imposter syndrome episode that we recorded a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, that's probably already released. If you're listening to this podcast right now, go check out that episode because I think that certainly overlaps with this topic of confidence.
Yeah. In that conversation, we talk a lot about integrity and just reflecting the values that you, or the image that you project on the outside, reflecting how you feel on the inside. And because feelings are volatile, like some of the truths you need to rely on to remain in integrity. And if you don't have that, if there's a disconnect there, I'm like, I can't, I foot, mouth, can't talk,
That's right. And I think one of the things that prevents people from being confident is the expectations that they put on themselves that they don't have to be putting on themselves. And oftentimes no other people are putting on themselves. I've talked to people before that are like, I just don't feel like I'm equipped to do this message because I feel like I need to be an expert on this content. And there are people that are better at this than I am. And I've only been doing this for 3 years now. And, who am I to give this talk? And there's so many amazing people in this room. And I think that person went astray the minute they put the expectation on themselves that they needed to be an expert, right? And that's why I love to tell people, I start out the gate, most of the talks that I give and say, just so you know, I'm not an expert on this. I am a practitioner. And my goal today is not to show you everything that I've learned that makes me a master of this subject. Rather, it's the stuff that I've practiced on this subject that I've found really beneficial and that I want to share with you. The minute you do that, my shoulders lower, my breath sinks in because I'm like, I'm just going to be who I am. But again, I can't do that if my primary goal is to impress you. If my primary goal is to impress you, then I'm never going to say stuff like that, right? If my primary goal is to serve you, then that's just a vehicle for being able to do that.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay. So it's clear, confident, concise. The way I used to teach this to high schoolers, and I don't know if it actually helped or not, but I would always say triple C, double E is what I think of. And so clear, confident, concise. This is something that people often get wrong in communication that we'll probably double back to here in just a bit in one of the future actions. We think that concise is the shortest message possible. That is not what concise means. It's accomplishing the intended objective in the most efficient way possible. So if I wanted to accomplish what we're doing right now as the shortest message possible, I would say the 5 qualities are clear, concise, confident, energetic, and effective. That's the podcast. And it would be a less than 30-second podcast that people listen to because that's the shortest message possible, right? But why do we not do that? Well, the reason why we don't do that is because I know that for someone to grow as a communicator, it's not enough just for them to get the information. They've got to have examples. They've got to have illustration. They've got to have reinforcement so they're fully convinced. They've got to have stories so that they're emotionally bought in. They've got to have inflections so that they stay engaged in all of that. And so what concise really is, what I'm evaluating when I'm thinking about concise is, did I accomplish my objectives, which means you have to have objectives, by the way, in the most efficient way possible. So if I wanted them to feel inspired and empowered to grow as a communicator, if I wanted them to understand the 5 qualities, and then if I wanted them to take one intentional action, if those were my objectives, what's the most efficient way to accomplish those objectives? And then we can start to look at how much time we took and how much time. But the thing obviously we're guarding against here is useless meandering in areas that don't at all tie into an intended objective. That's where we cross the line from communicating into talking, and it's not helpful. And so remember, concise, the most efficient way to accomplish your desired objectives.
What's the best way to know whether or not you're being either concise enough or you need to elaborate more?
Yeah, this connects actually to confidence too. And this is why I would say you want to be confident in your message and not confident in your ability to memorize. I know a lot of people that are actually speakers by trade, and what they actually are is they are world-class memorizers. And maybe there's a place for that. Those people make a lot of money actually. So maybe there's a very strong place for that, right? And I'm not demeaning that at all. That's just not what we're talking about here. And that's personally not the thing that I'm most passionate about. What I'm most passionate about is you being so well-versed in a skill, you being so well-versed in a subject that you have your base level outline because that's confident preparation. But then from that, you're able to adapt and adjust and move and mold to fit the needs of the audience.
Yeah.
And so the best communicators I know are the ones that are watching their audience. And it is wild. If you pay attention, and actually watch, most people don't look at their audience in the eyes. They either look at their foreheads or they look somewhere off in the distance that is no one at all. If you actually look in your audience's eyes, you will know when you've stopped being concise.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not even like sometimes they fall asleep, and that's really embarrassing. I've had that happen before, and you're like, oh gosh, what do I do here? Which I always shift to a story that gives me the ability to say, and bam, and like I walk right by them. It's great. Yeah. But more often than not, it's just like this glazed over look, and you're like, okay, I need to bring him back in. I need to reel him back in. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's a shift of subject. Maybe it's a story. Maybe I need to change my inflection or something like that. But we need to do something to accomplish our objectives. And maybe we're spending too much time on this subject.
I had a math teacher in high school who would lob expo markers in your general direction if you started to fall asleep.
Okay, so, never done that.
Yeah. Not probably recommended for this, but that's such an interesting. I haven't even. I guess I've thought about that before, like wanting to feel natural, engaging with your audience almost in a conversational way, because I think some of the most effective communicators that I listen to, it's almost like they're having a conversation.
That's right.
And I'm sitting across the table from you right now. I'm like, there is so much about communication that is non-verbal that like we're responding off of in a conversation. And if you remove that from the equation when it comes to public speaking and you're just staring off into the distance or not factoring that into, or like taking that into consideration, yeah, I mean, that's going to completely change the authenticity and ability for you to really engage with your audience. And I've never really, I mean, like, obviously I've always understood and heard that eye contact, things like that are important, but that I think adds an additional layer that I probably didn't even consider going into that.
And this is a little bit of a deviation, but directly related to the topic of effective communication. This is something that I've tried to grow very intentionally in the past 3 years, because it's not my natural style as a communicator. The minute you start telling a good story, people's eyes change. It is crazy. Like, it gives me chills talking about it. Emphasis on good story, right? But the minute you start telling a good story, oh my gosh, the entire dynamic of the room changes. So I think that's a great piece for engaging an audience that we've got to keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to concise versus, I guess, further elaboration and knowing that balance, you talked about memorization. And one of the things that I was talking to John Crawford about, our pastor, who we'll have on this podcast. We have a couple episodes with him coming up that I'm excited about. But we were talking, and he said there's a difference and there's a balance between internalization versus memorization, and being able to navigate, like, the story I was sharing, right, is something that I lived through. And so that is already internalized. Like, I could stand in front of a room and tell that story from start to finish any day, right? Like, zero preparation. Now, the clarity of it, the confidence I'm involved in standing in front of a room and telling that story. Like, there are some parts of it that, okay, yeah, some practice is probably good, but ultimately, like, I'll get from point A to point B in that story without losing track, because it's internalized. And then he talked about memorization, like memorizing the things that are important to make my point and to drive things home, like numbers, statistics, scriptural passages, things that, yeah, I don't internally know from experience. And that's when you refer or bounce back to a script, or you rely on more memorization and use that as a tactic. But there's definitely a spectrum where, like, full memorization, you lose all authenticity and connection with your audience, and full internalization is like, okay, you might get to a point in the talk where the audience is like, what's the point again? Like, where are we in this? You
That's
know?
right. Yeah.
And so I just loved that framework of internalization versus memorization. It really connected for me.
And I think well, who's to say what's quote unquote right? I would say my preference is to do a combination of the two.
You're right.
And if I was to look at my talks, I would say my best talks are 70% internalization, 30% memorization. And so that's not to say that should be your template, but you should probably, if you want to grow as a communicator, eventually get to the spot where you have a template of how much of this is internalized versus how much of this is memorized. What I often see, though, is that the minute people cross over the 50% mark into like 60, 70, 80% memorization, then they are spending all of their time and all of their brain capacity thinking about what's the next word on the page. And you can literally see it in their eyes. Like, their eyes are like looking up to the back of their brain, like it's written up there or something like that. And they are not able to spend any time analyzing how's the room receiving this.
Yeah.
And it's like a phone will ring, or someone will sneeze, or something crazy. A baby will start crying in the room, and it will be like, I'm pretty sure they don't even know that just happened, right? Because they just keep moving on. And that actually feels very inauthentic, right? It's why there's a leadership speaker. His name is Pat Lencioni. That's just, I would not call him a speaker. I would call him a communicator. He's so good. And it's just because what he teaches is just a part of who he is. And literally, someone sneezes in an audience of 4,000, and he will be smack dab in the middle of the thought, and he'll say, "Oh, God bless you." Right? And like everyone else is still 3 seconds away from realizing someone sneezed. But it's like, you just get the vibe that this guy is so in the moment.
Yeah.
And like, he's so reading the audience that he's able to respond on a dime. And it's very good. Very good.
Continuing the conversation on being able to connect with your audience and engage, where does the next one, being energetic or having energy, play into that?
Yeah, I heard a stat once, which I don't know how you measure this, but anecdotally say I feel like it is true. It said a communicator should never expect an audience to reciprocate more than 70% of the energy that they bring. And I, from my own experience, I can say I believe that is true, right? And I believe that is true in all ways, in terms of like, if you bring positive energy and you are 100% energetic, man, you're going to see more energy in the room. Conversely, if you bring 50% energy, it's going to be a free fall in your audience, and you should not expect them to respond to things. You should not expect them to engage with things. You should not expect their nonverbals to be good. This is why communication and leadership go hand in hand. You are the leader in this situation, and so you got to be willing to take the lead. And what we got to kind of remember is, do you want to be a thermometer or do you want to be a thermostat? A thermometer tells you what the temperature is. So they walk into a really low energy, boring, apathetic room, and they just say, well, this is the temperature, so this is how I'm going to communicate, right? A thermostat says, I quite frankly, it's irrelevant what the temperature is. I'm going to say, where do we want the temperature to be? And I'm going to strategize my talk around getting us there. This is what so many leaders don't do in the after lunch spot, right? If you're communicating after lunch, like, I mean, people would rather be taking a nap, period. Like, that is what is true, right? And so the best communicators I know, they don't ignore that, but they also don't settle for that, right? There's a lot of leaders. I mean, I've seen speakers say, well, I've got the afternoon slot, so just do your best not to fall asleep. And it's like, oh no, why are you saying this? What we should be doing is we should be acknowledging where the energy of the room is and organizing the first 10 minutes of our talk to get the energy of the room to where we want it to be.
Dive a little bit more into what you are saying about being energetic and what you're not saying about being energetic.
Yeah. What am I not saying? That you need to be Alex Judd, right? And that if you're not running out and jumping up and down, and like, I've done all of this before. I've jumped from one box to another and literally almost got horribly injured to like get people excited, right? And I jump up and down, clap, have people stand up, say yes, all that. I love that stuff, right? Do you have to be that to be an effective communicator? Absolutely not. I think of Olivia on our team. She stylistically is a radically different communicator than I. But man, when she gets up there, people lean in. And it's because her energy that she brings, I would say, would be characterized by poise, by preparation, and by great care. And so, like, man, she, like, these words matter to her. She has spent time on these words. And then she also has this great affect about her where she's got humor and smiling and encouragement, like, built in through her message that just feels very authentic to who she is, that I would say the room becomes more energetic the minute she gets on stage. And she didn't have to jump once, right? Which sometimes maybe I could learn from that, right? But you need to figure out what is authentic to you, is what I would say. The one thing I would caution people against, though, is if you have not spent a great deal of time communicating, then communicating itself will not feel authentic to you, right? And so don't nix certain tactics because you're like, oh, that didn't feel good right off the bat, just because maybe the thing that didn't feel good was communicating, but that's because you haven't really done it before.
Yeah.
And so you just need to have this trial and error period where you learn. And that's why reps are so helpful.
Yeah. I keep mentioning myself in the process for this, but that's because I'm being a student right now for this topic. And I think one of the things that you pointed out the other day that struck me was when I was kind of giving or practicing this talk, I was relying a lot on my script. And at this point, I hadn't really practiced it a ton. So some of that was expected. But I mean, I had written out almost word for word what I would have liked to say. And the thing that you pointed out in that was I almost lost energy by relying on it so much. And you told me, you were like, you are an animated communicator. You do talk energetically and you use inflection and you just kind of identified some of those things that I do in conversation when I'm talking, but I wasn't doing in the moment when I was practicing the talk. And it was like, oh, this isn't an issue of am I an extrovert? Am I like a crazy motivational person or not? And more of, oh yeah, does this feel natural for me? And of course not, because I'm not well practiced in it. So no, it doesn't. So I need to continue to practice.
I know you're an anime communicator because we do a lot of work from my house, and I'm often telling you, Ben, the baby is sleeping. You have to be a little bit more quiet.
Yeah, my laugh gets me in trouble alone in public,
right.
So.
Which is so good. Like, there's so much in that I would even say the other thing I would say with energy, because you mentioned laugh, is humor. Humor is like the one thing that opens the door to everything else. And I mean that. Like, you want to energize a room, like, find some ways to be genuinely funny. And it's crazy. I mean, I don't know, right? This is not a theological recommendation at all, but Joel Osteen, if you've ever watched a Joel Osteen sermon, the guy communicates in a very different way stylistically than what we're talking about here. But the first thing he does is he goes up and tells like the cheesiest joke. And he's not even apologetic. He like knows it's the cheesiest joke. The whole room of thousands of people laugh, and then they get into it, right? And I think the reason why he does that, someone that's incredibly gifted in the art of persuasion and communication, the reason why he does that is because humor is something that warms the room to everything else.
How do you incorporate humor into your communication? Is that something that you plan ahead of time, or is that something that you're like in the moment authentically using?
Both.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess there's a couple things I would say about this. I think the best humor is genuinely spontaneous, right? Like, it is like, I was preaching a message at a church once, and we were, smack dab in the middle of some pretty intense subjects. And the room is dead silent, and out of nowhere, a dog barks. Like, I didn't even know there was a dog in the room. And everyone was like, now think about this. If you're not confident in your message, what do you do in that moment? You probably just keep going because you're like, I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
That is not appropriate at that time, right? And so, like, I think I parked for 2 minutes on the fact that the dog was a charismatic dog, and he was saying preach, and he was in alignment with the message and all of that. And right, so the best humor is spontaneous humor that you can't plan for, but you're so prepared that when the opportunity arises, you can take advantage of it. I mean, people... it is so much fun. And then when that happens, you give people time to laugh, and you laugh at it too. If it's genuinely funny, like what are the clips from SNL that people love to watch the most is the one where they can't help but crack up, right? Now, if you do it too much, it's no good, right? But genuine emotion, genuine like laughter is so good. And then the second thing is prepared humor. And the way I do that is I know it's so effective now. I know, like, I think Dave Ramsey is probably one of the best of this I've ever seen. If you go I listened to a 30-minute talk he did for Life Church on financial peace. And I swear, as I was listening to it, the left page, right, of me, where I'm like kind of evaluating how he's communicating, I'm like, these people that are listening to this have not gone for a minute and a half without laughing a single time in this entire message. And what's crazy is there were also times in the message where he had them on the verge of tears. And so the fact that he can do that, like, he's sporadically like putting points throughout. And so what I like to do is I look at my outline, and then, this is maybe a couple days before I give the talk, I just ask, what in here is funny? And if you ask that question, it's crazy. Like, there is some stuff that is genuinely hilarious.
Yeah.
That then I find a way to work that into the talk.
Well, especially, in Dave's position, like, finances can be such a heavy topic for people that or boring. Like, I feel like there are multiple ways that people can go into a talk like that and be like, oh, brother, like, here we go. And I think incorporating humor makes it relatable and engaging, and B, just lightens the mood.
That's
like,
exactly right.
Being able to, you talk about pride being a potential issue, both on the extreme side of lack of confidence or like too much confidence. And what better way to alleviate that than to just acknowledge maybe some of the quirky things that happened during the talk, or like the unplanned things that go on, or yeah, what's funny about this topic? Like, what is actually humorous or weird or quirky in a way that I can use that to engage the audience in a relatable way.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And this is probably not fully the means of what we're talking about here, but I think it's good as something for people to be aware of. There's a communication tactic called the illusion of spontaneity, which I get a little bit skeptical of this because I'm like, well, the goal is to be authentic. And if you're doing illusions, then you're literally not being authentic. But there are a lot of incredibly effective communicators that leverage this very well of like, what do people want to know? People don't want to know, oh, this is a talk you've given 1 billion times. People want to think like, I'm getting the single best version of this talk and it's unique to me, unique to us. And so some really trained and practiced communicators will use what they call the illusion of spontaneity to basically have moments in the talk that look unplanned and that are funny or that are off the wall a little bit. And that gives the audience the impression of like, oh, this is just for us. This is our moment, right? That's more, I don't know that I would encourage people to spend too much time on that.
You also don't want to be manipulative.
That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah. And so I would say, but more than anything, I give that to you as a listener to say like, be on the lookout, because as you start listening to stuff like this, you'll start to evaluate communication and you'll probably start to see that stuff a little bit.
Speaking of spontaneity, I've decided we're having too much fun in this conversation. So we're going to do 2 parts.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
And so in the last, we have about 10 minutes left, or a little less than 10.
You mean you don't want to try and cram the final 5 actions into...
Well, we're going to really lean on clarity. We're going to just go through bullet points.
That's right.
No, let's jump into the last part of this section, which is effective, and go from there.
Yeah. So the first time I ever wrote this outline, right, on the beach in Panama City, or it was Orange Beach, actually, Alabama. I didn't know Alabama had great beaches, but it turns out they do. That's not an illusion of spontaneity. That right there is spontaneity.
Floribama, dude.
That's right. Yeah. So it was the 5 qualities of effective communication. And I worked on them and I said clear, confident, concise, energetic, and effective. And then I was like, well, that's kind of dumb. Like, one of the qualities of effective communication is that it's effective. But then I thought about it. I was like, I think that's actually really important. And that's why I've kept it all the way through to today, now 15 years later or whatever, is because when we talk about effective, the word is used so often that it becomes synonymous with good. And effective communication is good communication. It's not less than that, but it is a great deal more than that. Because effective communication, what does it do? It creates a desired or intended effect. So what we're really saying is, did your message do what you intended it to do? And that's actually going to get into the third point that we dive into in part 2 now of this conversation, which is really having aim and intent for your message. But it's why it's so crucial that in the preparation of our communication, we define what we are trying to accomplish. And then we have rhythms on the back end of communicating where we are genuinely asking, did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? And sometimes one of the objectives is, I want people to understand this message, right? Andy Stanley says, man, it's really helpful to have a 1-sentence message that if everyone gets nothing else, make sure they get this message. I'll give my talk and I'll have that message in mind. And then I'll just go to someone in the audience and I'll say, if you were to summarize that talk in 1 sentence, like what would you say? And sometimes, this is when I've nailed it, they'll tell me the exact sentence that I said. They will literally regurgitate it back to me, which that's a point in the effectiveness column, right? There are other times, which aren't my best as a communicator, where they tell me something, but it's nothing like what I was trying to communicate, which means I'm struggling to transfer things from my head to their head. And that goes all the way back to how complex it is at the beginning. But if we're never evaluating the effectiveness of our communication, we're basically our evaluation becomes, how'd you feel about that? And that's not a good evaluation.
Yeah. I feel like that just is true with anything, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
Like if you're not asking, like, did we accomplish the desired result at the end of something? I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. It's like, if you aren't evaluating on the back end, you're insane. like, I mean, that's what that means, right? Because you're just going to keep doing the same thing. If you're not actively going, oh, what did we do well? What can we do different? And did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? You're just going to be running on a hamster wheel and not really growing.
And that really effectively encapsulates really so much of what we've talked about today, because the difference between talking and communicating is, do you have a desired result? And then what we're talking about here now at the very tail end is, are you evaluating whether or not you achieved that desired result?
And I know this is the evaluation side is another point that we'll get into in the next episode, but we're out of time. So pause here and stay tuned for next week for part 2.
Awesome. Let's go.
Yep.
Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.